You wake up, you craft a pickaxe. It's a tale as old as 2009. Like the Metroidvania a decade ago, and the Souls-like as of late, survival crafting came along and dominated its parent genre. But the survival game is not all uppercutting trees and slapping together a few rocks and twigs to make a fully functional combi oven. There's also zombies too. DayZ, 7 Days to Die, Night of the Dead, State of Decay. There's definitely something about surviving in a world of zombies that excites the gaming community. So, in a genre seemingly dominated by a set few themes, surely there are a handful of games that stand out. Well, I'm glad to inform you that there are. A fair few of these games do use common tropes of the genre, but it's the creative ways in which they break convention while still being recognisable to their roots that we're interested in. So, I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 unique open-world survival games. Number 10. Ark Survival Evolved. Like an author with several different unfinished novels on the back burner, Ark's developers were so keen to add new content that they forgot to finish what came before. Yes, even though there's a veritable smorgasbord of things to do within Ark's dino-infested land, it's a world away from Naughty Dog or Rockstar levels of polish. Clearly, Studio Wildcard, or should I say Wildcard? No, I shouldn't, it's not a wildcard entry. Hasn't reached the industry standard intensity of employee crunch yet. Dinosaur games were at their most popular in the 90s for some unexplained reason, but unfortunately gaming technology at the time wasn't quite up to scratch for a true visceral dino experience. In fact, I did a playback video all about the PS1's offerings, so go check that out if you like. There's also been another boom as of late though for some other unexplained reason, and from this we've had a return of the rampant reptilians. Ark's release coinciding with Jurassic World being purely coincidental, of course. Still, Ark managed to utilise the survival crafting genre to truly create that game we all fantasised about as kids. On top of generic survival aspects, remembering to eat and not get eaten, the ability to tame your own dinosaurs can turn this into a kind of prehistoric Pokemon. They even recently introduced legally distinct Pokeballs. Cryopods, because as we all know, the one thing missing from Ash's classic adventures was the constant threat of hungry velociraptors tearing him limb from limb. Number 9. Kenshi. To just call this survival crafting would be a misnomer, as Kenshi is actually a bit of everything. Yes, there's survival crafting, but it also has a deep RPG, RTS, town management, and diplomacy sim in there. Does this all get a bit messy? Yeah, sort of. Does the sheer amount of content mean it's a buggy and ugly experience? Oh, absolutely. But is it also a unique game that truly deserves the moniker of do anything, in a way that many other games could only dream about? Oh, without a doubt. It's strange to say, but when you combine all the components of Kenshi, what you're left with is a hardcore survival game. There's no give, the world is harsh, and while you'd think that the multiple ways in which you can play the game would make it easier to persevere, it instead just means there are more ways it can batter you into oblivion. No, not that one, that's not a survival game. Admittedly, the jankiness or lack of predetermined rules and linearity might be enough to put you off Kenshi, but if you are wanting a proper survival experience that's so broad it's almost a genre of its own, with enough content to absorb hundreds of hours of your life, then look no further. Number 8. The Long Dark. Who'd have thunk it, eh? A survival game where the sole focus is surviving turns out to be a good survival game.
It's a bit weird, I don't think that's right.
It almost sounds silly calling it unique while knowing this information, but when you think about it, how many survival games are actually just about generally surviving in the wild? In Ark, there's dinosaurs. In Rust, there are other players. In the forest, there are cannibals. But in the Long Dark, there's just nature to contend with, real survival, and no gimmicks. Body temperature, calorie intake, hunger, thirst, fatigue, wind chill, and wildlife are just some of the perils you have to manage in order to stay alive. The Long Dark is a punishing, dismal experience in all the ways it should be, reminding you that the Canadian wilderness is actually a deadly place, and not just the pleasant vistas of Banff National Park that appear every few scrolls on Instagram. With the later addition of a difficulty setting, The Long Dark does now allow for a variety of playstyles. So if you want a more casual jaunt around the wilds of Canada, you can get that here, but if you're more the hardcore type of player who'd gladly play the game while sitting in an ice bath and eating nothing but foraged berries for a more realistic experience, there is also a mode for you, as well as everything in between. Give it a go. Number 7. Outward. A criticism of the traditional fantasy RPG is that death has no meaning. When you can just pop down a cheeky quick save, it doesn't matter if you get clubbed into oblivion. No, not that one. Actually, yes, that one. Bethesda RPGs are the epitome of death having no meaning, as the worst thing that can happen to you is that you forgot to regularly save, and now you have to replay the last 5 minutes. Oh, poor you. Outward does things differently though. By having factors such as thirst, sleep, and disease to contend with, Outward turns the usual chosen one cliché on its head. By putting you into the shoes of an average Joe, you can relate to the character more than you would do to your usual godlike fantasy protagonist. I say you and not we because I've been playing as a normal nobody for a while now. Bring back Normie Knob Day, am I right? Considering that fantasy RPGs are more about escapism than realism, the choice to make Outward try to balance the two may work to the game's detriment. It's a very particular type of player that Outward is aiming to impress, but with an intended niche such as this, surely it can't be categorized as anything other than unique, so it certainly makes the list. Number 6. The Sims 2 Castaway. Cast away on a desert island and not a single Wilson in sight, apart from maybe a pixelated one. Released a few years before Minecraft plucked the survival crafting genre out of the darkness and thrust it into the faces of the mainstream audience like an overenthusiastic Chippendales dancer, The Sims 2 Castaway appeared and helped set the foundations for what was to come. Sort of. While it's certainly not the first survival game, Castaway took an already unique formula in The Sims and doubled down on that originality by amping up the survival aspects. I say that because The Sims was already a sort of survival game, if you think about it. After all, you are building a house and managing your Sims' needs, so all you need to really do is add a bit of third-person zombie combat and you've got State of Decay, pretty much. Castaway isn't particularly difficult, more just requiring tedious repetition, but then again, difficulty is not really the point of The Sims, now is it? Although it does turn a survival game into more of an existing game. Much like Tamagotchis or the Cadbury Miniatures dispenser, I'd be willing to bet you haven't thought about The Sims 2 Castaway for many years. It's one of those PS2 games that has shuffled off into relative obscurity. Not here though, TripleJump never forgets, apart from sometimes when we forget things. Number 5. Grounded. I'll just say it now, there is another game in development that is almost identical to Grounded, which admittedly slightly takes away from the whole unique criterion of this list. It goes by the name of Smalland. Anyway, it's due to release sometime in 2021 and has been in development for as long as Grounded was. It's just that Grounded decided to go early access. Both involve survival crafting in a wilderness while being the size of an insect. Ugh, typical. You wait years for a bit of tiny human representation in a crafting game, and then two come along at once. There have been games about shrinking to a minuscule size before, Tales from the Minus Lab for example, but none have utilised the miniature theme in a game of this genre before. The perspective of an ant-sized human gives a whole new lease of life to the usual survival game tropes. Armour crafted from insect parts, chopping down tree-sized stalks of grass, and drinking the morning dew for sustenance gives the genre a fresh new feeling. Now, tiny players aside, this is still still pretty much a standard outdoor survival game, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed for a borrower's video game adaptation where we get to live inside the walls of a house and steal bits of food from the kitchen at night. Like I say, it's pretty much how I live in real life. Number 4. Raft. For when staying alive on land feels a bit too easy. Raft takes place at sea on a raft. You sail from place to place, scavenging debris and upgrading your watercraft, slowly developing it into a new floating home. You'll spend your days wading your way through the flotsam and trying to keep feisty sharks at bay, all while staving off death by thirst or hunger. Sounds lovely. One of the downsides of the usual survival game is that you have to spend most of your time venturing beyond your base. Obviously, it makes sense that you should go out hunting for fresh supplies, but it's still a bit of a shame to be so rarely at home that the base feels like more of an afterthought. Also, getting home with a pack full of goodies can sometimes feel like a slog, especially if you're halfway down a mine in Minecraft. In Raft, though, you take your base with you. While it might seem like a relatively novel concept at first, the fact that your base is also your means of travel gives an entirely new perspective on the genre. The titular raft is the selling point that makes the game stand out from its contemporaries. Other games have featured a similar theme of shark-infested waters and desert islands, such as Stranded Deep or even the previously mentioned Sims Castaway, but the way you take your home with you on your travels in Raft helps establish a connection with your base that can be often missing from other titles. Number 3. Darkwood. When you think survival horror, you're likely to conjure up images of Resident Evil, Dead Space, or WWE 2K20. How did that get in there? Yes, what springs to mind are linear horror titles based on set pieces and tense choreographed situations. What you generally don't think of is open world crafting games. While there are definitely a fair share of terrifying survival titles out there, like The Forest for example, none have done it in the way Darkwood has. Rather than the fear solely coming from enemies around you, Darkwood weaves a chilling narrative into its world. Even though everything is procedurally generated, the game is crafted in a way that makes it constantly tense and gives an eternal sense of foreboding. No artificial jump scares in Darkwood, it's all natural and all horrifying. The night has never been as effective as it is in Darkwood. Just throwing together a bed to speed up time until the morning isn't an option. Each night is a fight for survival, and the day isn't just for exploring, you need to prepare for what's to come. Even the top-down perspective adds to the horror. Rather than being able to see what's coming in the distance, you're given a limited, more claustrophobic view of your surroundings. Combine it with only a torch to break through the darkness, and you're going to have an unpleasant time in all the best ways. Number 2. Don't Starve. Don't Starve deserves a place on this list for its art style alone. The cardboard cutout design is reminiscent of Tim Burton and can only be compared to Darkest Dungeon, Hollow Knight, or the Misadventures of PB Winterbottom in the gaming sphere. This very specific art style is far removed from anything else in survival games. While the gameplay itself is quite stereotypical of the survival crafting genre, the world with its twisted and often creepy design is completely its own. Usually with games of this type, there's very little content outside of what's there in front of you, but Don't Starve is the complete opposite. You will never have 2 attempts that are the same. Yes, you'll still have to craft an axe, which is proving to be disproportionate in games compared to how often you'll have to do it in real life, but I can promise you it's worth it. Don't Starve is not like the others. It's strange, it's unforgiving, and its name is generally good life advice, so that's worth bearing in mind. And number 1, Subnautica. You'll find that a lot of survival games are, well, exactly that, survival games. They're about starting in a difficult situation and just keeping yourself alive. You'll usually struggle through setting up an encampment, planting a few potatoes, gathering some water, and decorating the place with a couple of petunias if you're doing particularly well. But Subnautica does things differently. For a start, you're underwater, and I don't mean you have to swim down every so often to gather some coral. It actually takes place almost entirely entirely underwater. Unlike most survival games, establishing a base and a steady source of food isn't your final goal. It's more of a way to enable you to progress through the story. And oh my, what a story. Mystery, conspiracy, the unknown. For what seems like a fun survival game, you will quickly learn that it has way more to offer you than you previously expected. This isn't even mentioning the fact that Subnautica is one of the tensest and most atmospheric games you'll ever have the pleasure of playing. Looking out over a steep precipice that drops off into unending blackness, only to hear the wailing of a colossal creature from out in the depths, is something that won't leave you anytime soon. I could go on forever, but instead I'll just say go out and give Subnautica a try for yourselves.